Hello everyone, I'm Julien Waro from NG Global Markets, and I'm really glad to launch the third edition of our quarterly Energy Scan webinar dedicated to energy prices and the recent rebound in energy markets over the last few weeks. Before we start, I wanted to thank you all for your trust, for your votes at Energy Risk Commodity Rankings. We were awarded with first rank in natural gas research and second rank for research in power and emissions. And that's really key for us. So thank you all. Thank you for those who answered our satisfaction survey in May. We had great results, and be sure that we'll continue to work hard to keep this satisfaction rate at the highest level in the coming months. So I'm really glad to introduce our speakers today. So we'll start with Olivier Gagné, which is our senior macroeconomist, and will make an update on macro and oil topics. It will be followed by Évariste Nouki, who is the head of economic research at NG Global Markets, and will give us his insights on natural gas markets. And then we'll conclude the session with Étienne Cauvin, who is our power and emission market analyst, and he will give us an outlook about the recent increase in power prices in Europe. So in terms of content, we'll start with macroeconomy and oil markets with some key questions about the recent recovery in economic activity seen in May and June. And given the fact that the coronavirus outbreak is still very active, especially in the US, we can question this recovery and what we can expect for the second half of 2020. You may have noticed that Brent prices are now back above the $40 per barrel level, especially thanks to massive cuts in OPEC crude supply. Will it be enough to rebalance crude markets in the context of weak energy demand? Concerning natural gas, we have seen a small recovery in natural gas prices in Europe and in the US, but prices are still relatively low. So did gas prices already hit the floor? Can we expect a further increase in the coming months? We'll have some answers from Évariste. And finally, for power and EUA markets, we have seen record high prices in emission markets in Europe recently, which led to an increase in power prices. So is there any room for further upside in the coming months? So just one last reminder before we start. This is an interactive session, so if you have any question, you can use the chat module to ask a question to our experts, and I will pick up 2 or 3 questions that will be answered at the end of each presentation. So thank you all. It's time for me to leave the floor to Olivier for macroeconomics and oil.
The pandemic is far from being over, as we have seen a reacceleration in new cases, which is not entirely due to the ability to test more people, but as we have seen also an acceleration of the number of deaths recently. What can be seen on the table on this first slide is the fact that the pandemic was really in Europe mid-March. It had already almost left China. Then in May, when Europe went out of lockdown, the problem was really located in the US and also in the UK and some emerging countries. Now the problem is really severe in many emerging countries, plus the US, where obviously, given the fact that this country is at the top of the ranking since the start of the crisis, where the management of the crisis has been really poor since the beginning. And you know the reason of this poor management. So we have I would say a pandemic that has accelerated. I was talking about the US. We have seen very recently in the US a worsening of the situation. You can see on the graph that concerns essentially the states of the south of the US, California, Texas, Florida in particular, with also an acceleration there in the number of new deaths. Yesterday there was, for example, more than 1,000 deaths in the US. Some states have already paused their reopening process, and some have even taken new measures to close bars, to close some company public services, to impose to wear masks, etc. So we have begun to see some consequences on economic activity since the start of July. You know that there are many what we call high frequency indicators, such as mobility, reservations in restaurants, footfall in commercial center, etc. They show that clearly there is a slowdown in activity in the US since the start of the month. We have seen also consumer confidence through the University of Michigan Index falling back to very close to its April and May levels, which means there will be consequences on consumer spending as well. Now, if you look at what happens in China, this is very different. China has been first in the pandemic, first out, as they started to reopen their economy as soon as April. And what would be very different for Q2 compared to other economies is the fact that the Chinese GDP has already rebounded, registering after a contraction of 6.8% in Q1. An increase on a year-on-year basis of 3.2% in Q2. So once again, that will be very different in the other country where you could see a contraction of between 10 and 15%, even worse probably for some countries. What is interesting in this Chinese recovery is that it is really imbalanced. We have seen a rebound in industrial activity. We have seen a rebound in construction, with in particular public expenditure, public infrastructure spending on the rise. But if you look at the graph on the right, the top graph, retail sales continue to contract. They have rebounded, of course, after the lockdown, but they are still negative. That reflects, of course, the fact that people's behavior has changed, and in particular, the consumption of services has not come back to a normal level. That is, of course, interesting for us because we don't see why it would be fundamentally different in Europe, for example. What is also interesting is that the recovery has been driven by rather resilient exports. And this is very strange. I have made a comparison between the evolution of Chinese exports and the exports in Japan or Germany to other big exporters. And you can see that there is something that is very surprising in the resilience of Chinese exports. So some doubts about the strength of the Chinese recovery, and on top of that, the fact that consumer spending remains above low for the time being. Just one word about what we have seen in Europe and the US in Q2 and now. I've talked about massive contraction in Q2 activity. That's true, but we have nevertheless seen a sharp rebound in activity in May and also in June. This is illustrated by the evolution of industrial output in Europe, in the main countries in this slide. and also industrial activity in the US with a rebound in May, followed by a stronger rebound in June. Nevertheless, what we have to keep in mind, because it's sometimes a bit difficult to look at all these figures, this is the fact that the level of activity remains abnormally low even after those rebounds. It's rather comparable. That means activity is still 10 to 15% below normal level, even after the rebound in June and July. That will continue in Q3 normally, with some, of course, some problems in the US if some states impose lockdown measures. But nevertheless, what is important to have in mind as well is that the easy part of the job, if I can say that, has been done in May and June. It was, of course, a mechanical rebound linked to the end of the lockdown. Now it's very difficult to come back to a normal level of activity. Why? Because if we look at the next slide, it shows the evolution of consumer spending. Consumer spending has rebounded strongly. You can see that in the US, for example, retail sales are back to pre-crisis level. In France, INSEE has made interesting estimates showing that for industrial goods, for consumer spending in manufactured goods, the level of consumer spending was even above normal level at the end of June. There are several explanations for that. The fact that, of course, revenues have been supported, the fact that the massive rise in unemployment has been avoided, so consumer spending has been resilient. The second thing, there has been a catch-up effect, of course, because after the lockdown, the savings ratio has exploded on the rise, and of course, people have benefited from many offers concerning, for example, big items such as cars or furniture, etc. And the third element is also the fact that energy prices were very low. And for example, for heating oil, we have seen a sharp rise in consumer spending. Now, if you look at the evolution of consumer spending in services, this is very different. And the consumption in services was still abnormally low, as we have observed in China. So we can think on the one hand that probably consumption in manufactured goods was a bit, I would say, too high, a bit overeating at the end of Q2, and that is a bit unsustainable, while it will be difficult to come back to a normal level of consumption in services due to restriction for tourism, travel, etc. Plus, of course, consumer confidence that is low if the virus continues to circulate. There is an additional point, and I have put a graph about the situation of the job market in the US to illustrate this. The fact that probably we are heading towards a massive rise in unemployment. What we have seen in the US is the fact that the number of unemployed has increased by more than 25 million at some point, and the number of continuing claims, so people continuing to ask for job benefits, remains abnormally high. Of course, the Congress will have to add some supports to revenue from August to avoid a crash in consumer spending. But this is the same problem everywhere, actually. I think that governments will have to add to fiscal expenditure from September to avoid a sharp rise in unemployment. They will continue to give subsidies to companies to keep people at work. Otherwise, we will have a sharp rise in unemployment. So it is very negative for consumer spending prospects. Okay. So just the last slide about the GDP forecast for 2020 and 2021. You can see the numbers are incredible with sharp contraction. You can see that IMF numbers are extremely low. We can consider that the lowest point has been reached with these IMF forecast. They are extremely pessimistic. Probably we'll have some upward version. My feeling is that the estimates for 2020 have been too pessimistic because in general, Q2 activity has been probably a bit stronger than expected, with the rebound in May and June being quite strong. Already we have some doubts about the recovery in Q3, but that won't impact that much 2020 figures, but more 2021. So in general, if you have to keep something in mind, is the fact that probably the fall in 2020 won't be as strong as it was expected, but the recovery in 2021 won't be as high as expected because of the persistence of the virus that will continue to weigh on the expenditure, on the, of course, also the threat of very high unemployment everywhere. Maybe some question on the macro report. I think I've been too long. Okay. So on oil, you have the first slide on oil describing the evolution of prices. Just as a reminder, the crash in oil prices that was not entirely due to the fall in demand linked to COVID-19, but also to the fact that, if you remember, Saudi Arabia tried to launch a price war just when demand was crashing. So there was a massive increase in stocks linked to this strategy in March, April. That was a complete failure. Then OPEC decided to cut output. There was also a cut in US output that supported prices, and we have seen a recovery in demand. So prices, as Julien said previously, are back to levels around $40–45 per barrel for Brent. So in a bit more details, if you look at the demand, demand outlook is being revised a bit higher for Q2. It has really crashed, but maybe less than expected. It is similar to what I said for global activity. For Q3, nevertheless, we are beginning to see some downward revision reflecting the impact of the resurgence of COVID-19 in the US. What is interesting is the fact that if you compare the forecast for 2021, so next year to 2019, 2021 would remain below, in terms of demand, below 2019. So not a recovery that would be complete. And that's normal given the description of the economic situation I have made just before that. In the very short term, there are some risks linked to the evolution of COVID-19. You have on this table the main countries and their share in the demand for oil. The main 20 countries that are listed on this table present about 60% of the oil demand loss in 2020. So that is massive. And of course, the fact that US, Brazil, India, Russia, big consumers of oil are in the middle of the crisis continue to weigh sharply on the evolution of oil demand. What is interesting is the fact that the spread of the crisis to less advanced countries, so poorer countries in terms of GDP per capita, means that the loss on oil consumption should be lower because I'm not talking about the size of the population, but really per capita. Because of course, the more the country is advanced, the highest is its consumption of oil. That may change in the future, but for now, this is the rule. So of course, there is also to take into account the fact that lockdown could be imposed, but we don't expect in general the total lockdown that has been imposed in March, April to be imposed again. And that means in terms of impact on oil demand, we shouldn't see again what we have seen in spring. On the supply side, we have seen a sharp fall in supply, in oil supply, one imposed by the evolution of prices, in particular in the US. I mean, I'm talking about the non-OPEC supply, because all the shale in the US has been hardly touched by severely touched by the fall in prices. As the activity became unprofitable, and those companies were very indebted. So we have seen a sharp fall in US oil output, about 2 million barrels. Now we have a kind of stabilization. On the forecast is that it should remain rather stable. We shouldn't see a sharp rebound in the US shale activity in the coming months. So rather neutral level, I would say, for the future. The second, of course, part of the supply cut came from OPEC and Russia, what we call OPEC plus. Though the efforts have been very strong by Saudi Arabia, Russia, they cut output by nearly 10 million barrels after the agreement in April, so in May, June, and also in July, because the agreement was extended for 1 month. Now they will start producing a bit more, plus 2 million barrels from August, or a bit less. And this is supposed to, the cut are supposed to diminish like this until April 2022. What is important is that the compliance that had been very low to the OPEC Plus deal in the past has been very strong because of the severity of the crisis. One of the big questions, of course, is will OPEC Plus countries be able to maintain this high level of compliance to the OPEC Plus deal in the future? So in terms of evolution of prices, we think that in the short term, the impact of COVID-19 on the risk to the downside on activity mean that probably, with also the fact that OPEC Plus will start producing a bit more again, will probably keep oil prices close to their current level until the end of the year. We don't expect any sharp increase from current levels. After that, in 2021, we think that probably we will be closer to a vaccine, or we should see some improvement in the COVID-19 situation. We could envisage a rebound to a higher level, but it will be difficult to have a clear improvement in the evolution of the oil market before that. At least for the coming months, we are rather neutral. We don't see prices for Brent going much above $45 per barrel in the near future.
So thank you, Olivier, for this presentation. I have two questions for you. So first one, what do you think of the deal reached by the European leaders at the beginning of the week?
Yeah, this is a very important deal. I think the proposal by France and Germany to do that in the May was a game changer for the euro area. The key point, I mean, I won't come back in detail about this deal, but the key point was to allow grants to countries that have suffered the most from COVID-19. What does it mean? It means that there will be fiscal transfers between, for example, Germany and Italy. Italy will, for example, receive more than 80 billion that will be reimbursed by everyone in the EU. Spain more than 60 billion, France more than 40 billion. So that is a very first important step towards fiscal integration. We are far from that, but it's the first time we have some fiscal solidarity inside the union. And we have seen a rise in the euro. The euro dollar is now above 115, but the move has started 2 months ago. And that reflects partly the difficulty of the US, of course, with the weakness of the US dollar, but also more confidence about the ability of the European Union to relaunch, I would say, its dynamics in the future.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. One last question. Why do equity markets and gold rise at the same time, which is quite unusual?
Yes, that's true. That can be quite surprising, but actually it's linked to I would say, several factors. First, the central bank's policy, the amount of liquidity in circulation is absolutely extraordinary. So this liquidity have to go somewhere, and they both fuel the rise in the equity market, which reflects confidence. Although we could say that this is mainly concentrated in tech stocks, and if you look at the broad equity market, it's not that optimistic. And it also goes towards gold. Why gold? Because it's both an hedge against a deteriorating situation and also an hedge against future inflation. And it's true that the abundance of liquidity in the market is increasing the inflation risk in the future.
So, Évariste, the floor is yours for the natural gas outlook.
Thank you, Julien. So, good morning, everybody. So, let's start the gas section of this webinar with the first slide about demand. So, European gas demand was down clearly in May, but it rebounded slightly in June, year on year, in most European countries, particularly in Northwest European countries. Because if you look at countries in the south, Italy or Spain, for instance, demand is still down year on year, although it is up month on month, particularly for power generation. As you can see it on the graph, which is just below, which is for Italy. So higher gas demand for power generation in June compared to May, but still down compared to last year. It's the opposite for Northwest European countries, where we have a rise in June compared to last year. So overall, we can say that, of course, we are seeing now a rebound clearly with the easing of lockdown measure and the restart of economic activity. So moving to the next slide about the Asian LNG demand, we can say that it is mixed. It is mixed because it is down month on month in China. Although, as you can see it on the graph, we are still significantly above the levels of last year in China. So still strong, although there is a slowdown month on month. In Japan, we reached a low, historical low in May. But now we are seeing a rebound in June, although we are still at the bottom of the range. Don't forget that in Japan, LNG gas is mainly used for power generation, and of course the country is also hit as the others by the COVID, and the slowdown due to this COVID is leading to a slowdown in power consumption in Japan as well. But overall, if you take global Asian countries, if you look at the graph on top on the left, demand is rather stable. Strong demand in China being compensated by low demand in countries like Japan and South Korea, for instance. When you move to the next one, here we are on the US LNG exports, which collapsed. They collapsed in June. The drop started, let us say, from April, but in June we had the real collapse. with total exports dropping to a little bit above 3 BCM. This is quite significant, both year on year and also months on months. If you look at other exporters like Australia, we are also seeing a drop. Because Australia, as you know, they send a lot of LNG to Asian countries, and given the slowdown in Asian LNG demand, of course, this is translated into lower export to Asia by Australia, which is not the case for Qatar. If you look at the graph on the top, on the left, Qatar is still exporting a huge volume of LNG, mainly because they benefit from rather low production costs, and of course their LNG is much more competitive. So the focus for this one will be mainly on the US one. This is the on the right, you have the graph, bottom right, the graph showing the trend between US prices and international benchmark, JKM spot, the European price. And you see that, of course, given the narrowing of the spread, there was no incentive for US exporters to flow LNG to Asia or to Europe, explaining the sharp drop in US LNG export. And this drop is mainly at the expense of European imports. This is what we show on the next slide. Sharp drop in European LNG imports following the cut in US LNG exports. And on the graph on the bottom, you see the drop in the market share from the US. US market share reached a high at 33% in Feb. It dropped to 19 in May, and with an additional drop in June, falling to just 14% of market share in June. And of course, this sharp drop in European LNG imports is impacting LNG sendouts. The LNG you put in the transmission network. LNG sendouts started to drop clearly from June, but if you look at carefully the graph, they rebounded afterwards. They rebounded just because European balances tightened. They tightened following the sharp drop in Russian flows. We'll come back to it later on, meaning that some additional supply was needed to compensate the loss in Russian flows. And part of this flexibility came from LNG sendouts. On the next one, we'll talk about pipeline supply in Europe, coming here from our two main suppliers, Norway and Russia. Starting with Norway, flows were rather low in May. They reached an historical low in May, but they rebounded in June. Don't forget that we talk about the drop in US LNG export to Europe in June. Of course, this drop was compensated by rebound inflows in Norway, but also in Russia. But since the start of July, flows are rather stable in Norway. If you go to Russia, it's the graph on the right. There was also a rebound in June. Although the flows didn't drop as low as in Norway, of course, rebound in June. But now the focus is what is happening in July. And from the mid of July, from the 14th of July, there was a sharp drop in Russian flows due to the maintenance on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. So cutting supply almost by half. So you can see it clearly on the last graph, which is on the bottom. Sharp drop in Russian flows from mid-July. And you see that this will tighten European gas balances, as you already saw, because you need to compensate by LNG sendouts and also by some storages gas. But the impact on prices will not be so big, just because you manage to compensate using some other supply flexibility. So this leads us to the storage outlook. If you look at the graph on top on the left, the stock levels are still comfortable. Of course, we are still above last year's level. But if you look at the gap, of course, is narrowing. The gap is narrowing because with the rebound in spot prices in June, following the cut in US LNG supply, of course, the discount of spot prices compared to the first month or the near curve, which is so on the which you can see it on the graph which is on the bottom. The lower the discount, of course, the less the incentive to put gas into storage. This explains part of the reduction in the net storage injection. The other one, which is linked to the first one, is just that the supply-demand balance tightened. It tightened because of the cut in US LNG export, and it tightened further from mid-July with the sharp drop in Russian flows. So now the gap is lower, of course, but overall the market still believe that we are comfortable. We are still at comfortable levels. So despite this drop in net storage injection, we believe that the supply outlook remains comfortable, and this will explain why the market did not really react to the cut in Russian supplies and continue to keep a rather stable to bearish mood. So on the next slide, we'll move now to the price impact, starting with the view on spot and near curve prices on the month side, the first nearby or month side. The trend was bearish, clearly. The trend was bearish, amplified by the lockdown measure. You can see it when you look at the value from mid-March. Prices amplified their decline. But in fact, when they reach their bottoms, it was in May. And when we start to see the cancellation of US LNG cargoes, prices rebound from June. This was rather normal rebound due to the tightening of the balance as we had less LNG supply in Europe. But you can see that the price rebound was not so massive. It was not so massive, but if you remember, I talked about the rebound in Norwegian and Russian supply in June. So the market say, okay, we have less US supply, but at the same time, we have higher Norwegian and Russian supply. So the market remains comfortable. This explains why prices didn't rebound. And they even start to drop by early July. Because the storages, of course, started to be replenished less, but they remain comfortable. But on top of that, you have another outlook, which is about US LNG. The spread has narrowed, explaining why you have less US LNG. But if you look at now what will happen from September, we are seeing a widening of gain of the spread. So people were saying, okay, maybe from September, we'll start to see again US LNG coming to Europe. This is the message of the next slide. When we compare the trend in the US Henry prices on the red line, compare them to other indicators for the European market, the orange line being the TTF, month ahead, you have the day ahead, the green line. Note that the day ahead is very close to the month ahead. And then you have another indicator, which is the 20-day average. The historical part, you can see it easily, and then when you start to have the steps, this is the forward. So for now, we can easily understand why we don't have US LNG to Europe, because prices are quite similar, almost no spread between US LNG prices and TTF prices. But if you look at from September, we start to see again a spread widening to 2, 3, a little bit to 3.5 by the end of the year. That's why we believe, and some market players believe, that from September, we'll start to see again US LNG to Europe. And if you look at some forecasts given by the Energy Information Administration, they even say that, okay, Currently, we have US LNG at 2 BCM, but we'll start from September. We can move to 3 and then 4, and by the end of the year, December, we can see again 6 BCM of US LNG being exported, what was roughly the case at the start of the year. So to me, this is why some market players believe that, of course, the system could be a little bit tight because of lower flows coming from Russia. But we have some flexibility on the LNG side, at least because the spread is telling us that US LNG could come back to Europe again. Let's move to the TTF outlook now. Just to say that if you look at TTF Cal 21 prices, they have stabilized. They have stabilized, and in fact, they are even ignoring the continuous drop in the 1 year average of spot prices. I don't know if you remember this indicator. We show it last time, just to say that at that time prices were following the drop of the 1 year average of spot prices, which tend to be a rather good indicator. This is no longer the case. If you look at the current 1 year average of spot prices, we are roughly at 9. If you extend it to December using the current forward prices, you could drop to 7.5. With our price projection methodology, we believe that TTF prices could drop by the end of the year a little bit below 11. So just to say that it will be difficult, according to us, for TTF prices to drop to the indicator given by the 1 year average of spot prices, just because the market is putting a risk premium on this TTF price. We'll come back to it later on, but this risk premium will be mainly linked to the Russian supply, and in particular to Nord Stream 2. So it will be difficult to have a level close to spot prices. What does it mean? It means that if you want to have a level for TTF 21 close to spot prices, maybe you have to go to the spot because it will be difficult to reach on a forward basis. And then let's move to the next one, and the last one. It's about the outlook. The outlook is a graph which is a summary of all the fundamentals that are driving European gas prices. Of course, you have now the US indicator, which tend to be a kind of minimum for our European prices. And in terms of maximum, you have the Asian price, the market maximum, you can say. You have the Asian GKM price. You are still trading below. But if you want to have some maximum benchmark, you have the oil index references. You have them both for Europe and Asia. The European one is lower compared to the Asian one. I believe that for the remaining of the summer months, let us say July, August, September, there is very low upside potential. In fact, prices could remain low, in particular as US prices are setting a kind of let us say they are a kind of market regulator. We already mentioned it. If prices tend to rebound a little bit, they will increase the spread with the US price, and then you will have LNG coming back to Europe. So very low upside potential up to September. But when you start October, you start the winter period. And in Europe, between September and October, you can have in a normal weather pattern an increase of 10 BCM of increase of demand from September to October. And then from October to November or December, you have an additional 10 BCM. This means that those volumes cannot be managed by US LNG, of course. Even if you put US LNG at a maximum, they cannot fulfill and compensate all this increase in demand. Just to say that this increase in demand, you have to ask to the traditional suppliers, Norway and Russia in particular, to compensate and offset this increase. So for me, starting this winter, starting October, Russian supply will become key. And Russian supply will become even key in 2021. And now we have to talk about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is expected to come online end of this year, start of next year. This is still uncertain because the project is under pressure, both from the European Union and the US. The US is fighting sanctions against all the companies that are in the projects. And on the European side, in fact, Europe tend to put a pressure on Gazprom, asking Gazprom to end its pipeline monopoly and to offer third-party access. In fact, European players are just saying that maybe we don't need Nord Stream 2, and Russia can continue to supply the European market using the current lines via Poland and also via Ukraine. And my opinion is that if this dispute leads to a disruption in system flows, but of course, this will be very, very bullish for prices. I believe that this is what the market is pricing, but maintaining a premium on Cal 21 compared to the current spot levels. So that's it for me. I don't know if there are some questions, Julien.
Yes, Évariste, we have some questions from the audience for you.
Yes.
So, first question. So why Europe and China LNG imports were very high at the beginning of 2020?
I will say that for China, it was quite obvious. They continue to increase the share of gas in their mix. As you know, the mix, the energy mix in China is mainly based on coal. They are trying to change it and to move more on natural gas and renewables. So this was rather normal to see China continue to import a lot of LNG. And of course, with the outbreak of the COVID, this increase was slowed down, but just slowed down because if you look at the graph, we are still at rather high levels for China. And for the European Union, of course, we have gas demand, which is increasing less, but the share of LNG is increasing just because LNG is competing for market share as well. In a context where you have a lot of LNG worldwide, because you have a lot of projects in the US, in Australia, and at the time there was a slowdown in Asia, you have an excess of LNG worldwide, pushing prices low. And you can think in particular of US LNG. The US LNG was very competitive. The spread between European markets and the US entry price at the start of the year, as I mentioned, was comfortable. So this explains why LNG was able at that time to come to Europe, just because LNG was competitive compared to pipeline gas coming from Russia or Norway, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Évariste. A second question talking about US LNG. Did US LNG market share drop due to shut-ins from low European gas prices?
In fact, when you look at the total US LNG, of course, they drop. They drop to Europe, but they drop also to Asia. It's the total US LNG export that were down, because I don't know if you remember the graph. The GKM price also was low. So for US LNG exporter, all the export markets were not supportive, either Europe or Asia. Either Asia a little bit more than Europe, but not so much. But all the markets were not supportive. So the total US LNG exports were down.
Okay, so one last question for you, Évariste. So is there any interest for month-to-date prices for gas in months to come? I think this is the traditional question. do spot versus month-ahead hedging. Do you have some insights about that?
Yes, okay. First, I mentioned that they are very close, because you have an arbitrage between the spot on the day ahead and the months ahead. Until recently, I believe that in fact more and more you will have an incentive to go to the months ahead, because my idea is to say if you have a rather good price on the months ahead, maybe you can take the months ahead price and not try to go to the spot, because on the spot you never know. You can have some cuts, you can have some technical outages and so on. But given the current outlook with the US LNG as market regulator, and also with the fact that we have the feeling that for the time being, Gazprom want to push some volumes on the market and not really try to push the price up, we believe that there is still additional downside pressure on the spot. The spot can be the day ahead. You can remain day ahead, or of course you can, if you have a rather good price on the month side, you can catch it. But both day ahead and months ahead hedging are relevant for the time being. We are not yet in the winter period. You don't have the weather risk. So if you have to buy your gas for August or September, I believe that you are not in a hurry. You can still remain on the spot. But starting October, you have to be careful.
Okay, thank you, Évariste. So we have other questions. We were short on time, so we'll answer them by email after the presentation. So don't worry about that.
Good morning, everyone. Let's talk about power and carbon prices. So, as I'm sure you've all seen, and if it's not the case, as you can see on the left chart, after collapsing in March, the long-term power prices have significantly risen over the past months. And this quite surprising bullish trend, surprising considering the impact of the crisis on the economy, can be attributed mostly to two bullish factors. The first one is an unexpected rally of emission prices, of course, that you can see in the upper right graph, and the French nuclear production dropping to historically low level, as you can see on the bottom right graph. But is there more upward potential for power prices from these two factors? Well, first let's have a look on the carbon market. So why an unexpected rally of EUA prices? Well, because the fundamentals of the carbon market remain significantly bearish. The main factor is, of course, the expected reduction of emissions in 2020, estimated between 10 and 13%, which correspond to 150 to 2 million tons of CO2. And you can see it on the upper right graph with the black histogram. So this, by contrast, the verified emissions dropped by 8.6% last year. Of course, I'm talking about only the emissions from the installation within the EU ETS. And this expected drop of emissions come on one part from the dampened activity of the power, industrial, and aviation sectors, the latter being the most impacted by the crisis, but also from the low gas prices, as Évariste showed you, which are ensuring the competitiveness of gas power plants over coal ones. So as you know, the power production based on gas is less emitting, so this leads to less emissions and, of course, a lower demand for allowances. Well, it should. On top of that, the negative clean dark spreads are limiting the coal-based production overall. So another bearish factor for the carbon market is the strong auction supply coming in the next months. Indeed, 50 million allowances from the innovation will be added to the EU common auction over the rest of the year. Of course, it's 50 millions, not in one auction, but over the whole period. Moreover, the market stability reserve will absorb the allowances supply generated by the crisis only from September 2021, as it is how the mechanism is designed. Still on the primary market, we can see the lack of buying interest from the compliance company in the cover ratio of the auctions since March. So let's focus on the bottom right graph. The cover ratio, which is represented by the blue line, is the ratio of the total volume bidded over the auction volume. So it usually is used as a good indicator of the buying interest from the compliance companies for the current prices of EUAs. And as you can see on the graph, the cover ratio have remained below the year-to-date average, which is represented by the green dotted line. I hope you have good eyes, since the beginning of the crisis. Finally, the bleak economic outlook and the potential second wave of virus that Olivier told you about could be signs of lower demand for allowances in the upcoming months. Okay. But despite all these bearish factors, EUAs have climbed above the pre-crisis level, as you can see on the upper right graph, and even reached a multi-year high last week, above 30 euros per ton. And of course, this steep rise dragged power prices significantly up. That's the reason of our presentation. So who are behind this bullish trend? Well, as you know, the carbon market is highly speculative, and it's based on the estimation of the long-term supply-demand balance, which is why it is often driven by political decisions impacting the market. For instance, we have seen the market being driven by all the Brexit news last year. Well, this time it seems that the bullish trend was more supported by speculative buying based on the current discussion about strengthening the European Union climate ambition. I'm sure you have all heard about the European Leaders Summit last weekend. And strengthening these climate ambitions is likely to imply a reform of the EU ETS. And this reform would aim at reducing the surplus of allowances in the market to support carbon prices and, of course, keep an incentive to reduce emissions, which is the main goal of the EU ETS. Therefore, long-term investors, by anticipating higher prices coming from this reform, are likely to be behind the bullish move of EUAs. But there are other actors that may have participated as well. For instance, the utilities. They may have provided support by increasing the pace of their hedging. So the logic behind this would be to lock their margin. And I think it can be seen in this graph, showing very positive clean spark spreads, which are the margins for gas-based production. And by locking the margins, they avoid price risk from the large remaining uncertainties. For instance, the power demand and economic recovery. Although this would explain mostly the rise of emissions prices in May and early June, since we now have a better view on the power demand recovery and economic recovery. The carbon market also received the support from the strongly correlated oil and financial markets. So we have seen this strong correlation, which was already existed before the crisis, but have strengthened since the speculators are dominating the market and are looking for more established markets to follow variations. And you can see it on the upper right graph with oil prices in black and EUA prices in blue. So you can see the strong correlation. And thanks to that, the reduction of crude oil production announced by the OPEC Plus and the numerous stimulus measures from the central banks and governments to restart the economy provided support to carbon prices. Also, the low French availability, of course, expected this winter, have participated to the bullish trend by increasing the thermal production for that period. But I will talk more about the subject later in the presentation in the power slide. Additional support may have come also from a more technical aspect of the market, from short covering. So it's just to say the closing of short position opened in early May, and automatically triggered short position by algo trading. So basically, traders and algo trading playing with the market, trying to catch the stop losses and of short sellers. Also, this was all possible thanks to a lack of compliance selling from cash-strapped companies, compliance companies, of course, which did not sell their allowances to get government aid programs, and so they avoided to raise much cash and to get these aid programs, and due to uncertainties on 2021 free allocation. Of course, if the coming free allocation are reduced, compliance company will be glad to have kept some of their allowances surplus. And finally, carbon prices may have been lifted by market participants anticipating the usual lower auction supply in August, which occur every year. So how the EU ETS reform that push carbon prices significantly up could materialize? Well, it could materialize through different mechanisms. So as you know, the EU member states are currently discussing the raise of the EU emissions reduction target to 55% from 1990 levels, the current target being at 40%. And Germany has restated its willingness to raise its target to 55%. But such increased climate emission would imply a revision of the current EU ETS to reach these objectives. So how can it be done? Well, first, an easy way to reduce the current surplus of allowances in circulation would be to strengthen the market stability reserve. So the current mechanism absorbs each year 24% since last year of the surplus in circulation by reducing the coming volume auctioned. And with the current design, this intake rate will reduce to 12% from 2024. So a reform of the EU ETS could imply an extension of the 24%, after 2023. So for the whole first phase of the EU ETS. But it could also imply rising this intake rate to, for instance, 30% to absorb more of the allowances surplus generated by the COVID crisis. A second possibility to support emissions prices would be the implementation of the carbon floor price. And there has been some consistent rumors recently about implementing this new mechanism with mention of a 25 euros per ton floor price. But actually this level comes from the current price floor of the local German non-ETS. Well, it's ETS, but the local ETS. That's why you may have seen it, but no official number, no decision have been published on the matter so far. And with carbon prices dropping to 14 euros per ton at the beginning of the crisis, you can imagine the implication of such carbon price floor. Another way to support prices would be to raise the linear reduction factor. So as you know, the EU ETS is a cap and trade system where each year the total aggregate volume of emissions allowed for the installations covered by the system is defined. That's what we call the cap. And to incent a reduction of emissions, this cap decreases every year following the famous linear reduction factor. So this LRF is fixed at minus 2.2% from 2020 to 2030. So for the first phase of the EU ETS, it was previously to 1.74%. But as you can see on the chart, with the current estimations of future emissions, the cap remain slightly overestimated. As you see, the estimated emissions are below the cap. So the cap is defined by the orange line, while the estimated emissions are in the blue histogram. So raising the LRF to 4%, for instance, there has been no rumor of such a number. It's just an instance to demonstrate the impact of such a mechanism, would have a significant impact on the market supply balance by undersupplying the market, as we can see with the new cap defined by the yellow curve. And finally, and this might be the most difficult mechanism to implement, but the more discussed currently, it's the integration of other sectors in the EU ETS that could increase the demand for allowances. And the first steps have been reached regarding these mechanisms, with recently the EU Environmental Committee voting in favor to include the shipping sector, a decision that has been backed by the EU leaders during the recent summit. However, a high carbon price could threaten the European industry. And to avoid the destruction or relocation of most of the energy intensive and emitting sectors, the EU will have to consider financial support for these sectors or the implementation of a border tax, which is currently being discussed as well.
Excuse me, Etienne, just to notice that you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, I will speed up. So let's talk about the power market. And first, I did not mention it in the introduction, but it's an important factor, which is the power demand recovery. So as you can see on the chart, both charts, most of the European consumptions have recovered since the massive drop in March induced by the lockdown. So in the continued line, you have the current power demand from European countries corrected from the temperature effect. And in the dotted line, you have the 2019 equivalent weeks power load. So despite the potential error from the model of correction from the temperature effect, it appears that the Italian and Spanish power consumption remain curbed compared with the 2019 levels. And we can see it on the upper left graph, which is a deviation from 2019 levels. And we can see that both countries have not reached yet a 0% deviation. However, the French power demand is now close to last year's level, with deviation dropping below 5%, which is near the error margin from the model used to correct the temperature effect. The Belgian consumption, even seems to have recovered completely, although the country was less impacted by the crisis demand-wise. This data might appear encouraging and could explain why most market participants consider a fully recovered power demand when estimating the price for this winter and the year to come. However, as Olivier presented you, according to a report from Eurostat, the industry sectors presented a 21.5% drop in production in May from the previous year. So even if this number is a bit outdated now, it reflects the strong impact of the crisis on the industry sector. It could be a sign of a longer-term impact of the power demand. On the power demand, sorry, not off. The European power consumption seems to have quickly recovered, quicker than we first expected, to be honest, but the last percentage of deviation may be the hardest to erode, and the market may have slightly overestimated the power demand in the upcoming months. And that is, of course, without considering the second wave of virus and the lockdown induced. So now let's have a look on the nuclear availability issue. And I think it's better to see the remaining potential, remaining potential from this fundamental is to look at all the modification EDF has carried out over the past months. So as I'm sure you all know, in early May, as a consequence of the lockdown, EDF, in early April, sorry, not May, EDF significantly reduced its nuclear output target for 2020 from 2070 terawatt hours to 300 terawatt hours to 300 terawatt hours, sorry. So you can see on the graph, the blue dotted line represented the previous level anticipated by EDF, and the blue continued line represents this new output target defined by EDF. So the adjustment resulted from a massive maintenance disruption, of course, induced by the lockdown, with all the maintenance put on hold, all the maintenance not necessary immediately, and induced some fuel saving shutdown to preserve fuel for the winter season, which is critical. In early May, EDF postponed the maintenance of 30 nuclear reactors up to 4 months, increasing the availability in the fourth quarter. And we can see it with the yellow line, which represents, of course, an increase in availability for the last months of the year. But instead of shutting down more units afterwards to save fuel, EDF chose to bet on a reduction of the maintenance duration to increase the availability this winter, which might pose a problem because if EDF wait too long to proceed to these fuel-saving shutdowns, it might not have the possibility anymore in the upcoming weeks, and which could impact the nuclear availability if EDF does not manage to respect the new maintenance durations and short-term maintenance duration. In early July, so a few days ago, the French utility raised back its 2020 nuclear output target to 315 to 325 terawatt hours, which of course increased the Q4 nuclear availability by 5.5% to 46.6 gigawatts, which represent a 2.6% increase from last year. Of course, it's only the transparency data, and we do not expect EDF to respect this exact level, but more about 80% of this level in reality. and we can see, and it's important, the impact of each EDF announces on the price. So of course, most of the impacts is being seen on the Q4 contracts, and we can see the first new announce of the new 300 terawatt-hours target on the left, which drastically increase power prices. And a few days later, the official publication of the new REMIT transparency data. The increased availability in Q4, the first revision of EDF, also pressured the prices early May. And finally, we had a massive reduction of Q4 power prices due to EDF raising back its 2020 output target. Okay, so to conclude, because Julien is telling me that we are a bit late, as I shown you during this presentation, significant uncertainties remain regarding the coming evolution of power prices. On the bearish side, we were expecting a downward correction of EUA prices toward 25 euros per ton to better reflect their fundamentals. And that's what we've seen last Thursdays and over the past days. And I think this morning price were falling towards 26 euros per ton. The bearish move may be induced by compliance company monetizing their allowances and by some profit taking from the high prices of emissions from the 30 euros per ton reach last week. Also, a second wave of virus could pressure strongly the carbon prices. And with the resurgence of new cases, as Olivier told you, some countries are locally getting back into lockdown, which kind of worrying for the carbon market. Also, regarding the power recovery, the economic crisis could have a longer impact on the industry sector, limiting both the power and allowances demand. And finally, the market could realize the time needed to reform the EU ETS, and for this reform to have an impact on the supply-demand balance could take some time. And knowing that the long-term investors were mostly responsible for the recent bullish trend, buyers with less financial resources could sell back parts of their long positions, pressuring carbon prices. But on the other hand, the market could also face some bullish support. First, and this is the main possibility, investors and speculators have managed to lead the carbon market to a new high last week, despite the bearish fundamentals. And after the current correction of prices, we could see them try to lift back the market above 30 euros per ton. Also, the EU leaders have confirmed their intention to raise the bloc's climate ambitions. So this increases the likelihood of a reform of the EU ETS, which has been mainly speculative so far. However, the impact on the carbon market will depend on the mechanism implemented. And finally, we could see a new downward revision of EDF's forecast for its nuclear output for this winter. The market is already expecting a lower availability compared with the REMIT transparency data, but we all know EDF's ability to respect their maintenance's duration. I put on the bearish factor the other way around, better than expected nuclear availability, but to be honest, it's not very likely. So to be honest, I think the upward potential remains limited regarding the French nuclear availability. I think the table at the bottom on the slide clarify my opinion. The first two lines are the quarterly averages of power spot prices in Germany and France, clean gas cost averages, which are the cost to produce 1 megawatt hour of electricity from gas, so taking into account gas and emission prices, and of course the average nuclear availability. The third line represents the current estimation of the market for the Q4, so basically the Q4 contracts prices, and the REMIT estimations of nuclear availability. So the 2018 level is interesting because we had a short cold spell combined with low renewable production, which put price above 100 euros, spot price above 100 euros per megawatt hours punctually. And we can see that the average prices are indeed above the prices forecast for 2020. However, the clean gas cost was much higher, and it would need a significant drop in nuclear availability or a significant rise in carbon prices for spot prices to reach this kind of level. The 2019 level is also a good reference level because it had similar clean gas cost and nuclear availability as now. And we can see an important premium on the current prices for the French prices amounting to 14 euros per megawatt hour. So to conclude, now that EUAs have corrected and EDF have raised back its nuclear output target and pressuring the power prices, there is some upward potential from the nuclear availability and carbon prices. Emissions could quickly recover if speculators manage to lift back the carbon market, and EDF could realize it won't be able to reach their new output target. But it's difficult to imagine that power prices could go above what we have seen early July, since the bearish fundamentals of the carbon market should limit the gains of carbon prices in the short term, while EDF is likely to do its best, hope they will, to ensure an optimal nuclear availability this winter, even if it does not reach this new target. However, on the longer term, the postponement of the numerous nuclear outage could have an impact on the 2021 nuclear availability and may provide support to frontier contracts when we'll have a clearer view on the schedule, the new maintenance schedule, and the capacity of EDF to respect its maintenance duration, which we will see in the upcoming months. Okay, so that's it for the power and carbon markets. If you have any question, I'm ready to answer.
Okay, thanks a lot, Etienne. So we are really running short on time, but we'll take some minutes to answer questions from the audience. So questions first on the French power supply. So which room for additional CCGT generation in France this winter compared to the current situation?
I don't know if the question is about the current gas installed capacity or the forecast of production. I think it's more the second. Well, with the very low nuclear availability, it's highly possible that the CCGT generation will increase this winter, compared, of course, to the current situation, but with the high. No, I think the current situation represents our forecast. It's highly possible if the nuclear availability continue to fall, that the CCGT generation forecast increase in the upcoming weeks.
Okay, so one question about power prices. So what is the outlook for Cal 21 French power prices? Which key drivers will we see volatility again in the coming months?
So of course, the volatility will remain strong due to the uncertainty on the carbon market. We don't know what the speculators and investors will do with carbon prices, and that will be the main key drivers. But there will be also the ability of EDF to respect its maintenance duration. If it does not, it could support Cal 21 prices, because we could expect the same kind of maintenances duration in the coming year. And EDF has not yet published its forecast through the transparency data of all the postponement of nuclear maintenances. We get it. So we might expect further downward revision of the nuclear availability forecast for 2021. And finally, will we have to check on the gas prices? So as Évariste told you, the outlook can be bearish for the coming years, which would provide another support for power prices.
Okay, thanks a lot, Etienne. It's time for me to conclude this webinar session. So thank you all for your attention. We apologize again for some technical issues we had. Please, can you take 30 seconds to answer our survey, our satisfaction survey? That would be very great for us to improve our services. So note that the next webinar session is planned for October. Concerning this session, the slides and the replay of the session will be available soon in EnergyScan in the classical sections of the app. So don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions about the webinar. As said before, we'll give you some answers by email for all the questions for which we did not have the time to answer. So thanks for those who participated in the survey. Maybe we can answer to one last question if Etienne is still here. Etienne, are
Yes, I
you
am.
still there? There was an interesting question from the audience about the duration of CO2 allowances. What is the duration of a CO2 allowance?
That's a good question. In the allowance, there is no expiry date. So you can keep your allowances both over the past 10 years and use it in the coming years. So that's why there are such a huge surplus of allowances in the market. And that's why compliance companies are retaining theirs despite their expected drop in emissions. And that's why such discussions on the EU ETS reforms already weigh strongly on 2021 CO2 prices.
Okay, thanks again, Etienne. I'm closing the survey vote, and so that's the end of this webinar session. Have a good afternoon, and we are looking forward to hear from you in the coming months. Bye bye.